haven't seen much in my short life. I'm an ordinary guy, studying in the third year of a medical university. Recently, I've witnessed some inhuman events, which I don't even know how to describe. They turned my whole idea of life, and the people who appear in it, upside down. I never thought that I would communicate with a freaking beast in the likeness of a man, but it happened, and my story will be about an internship in our city morgue. This old building, which hadn't been repaired for a dozen years, was located next to the regional hospital, or to be precise, behind it, and anyone walking would never notice it, even if they stared intently in that direction. I suppose it's logical that I studied at the university as a pathologist. It's a long story why I went to study such a strange or maybe even terrible craft. It may seem strange, but I didn't have such a fear of dead bodies. Several times we were taken with the group to the same morgue that I mentioned earlier. As soon as we entered, the girls immediately closed their mouths and crouched from the sight of the bodies lying quietly on the tables. Not only the girls, but also the guys were faint and almost vomited looking at the corpses. I have no idea what made them choose this profession. If they weren't fools, they would think about what was waiting for them. But I was interested. I listened and memorized every word of the pathologist, and didn't feel at all uncomfortable when he handed me a scalpel and showed me where and how to cut the flesh of the dead. Frankly speaking, at first, there was a certain disgust, and even I would say fear. But the fear was still no longer from the corpses and thoughts about them, but from any of my wrong actions, which was immediately noted by a strict teacher. But in general, I was really interested, and I even planned to stay working in the same place where I had an internship. If not for one thing, a stern but fair-minded man in a slightly blood-smeared apron was sitting on a chair next to the autopsy table when the heavy metal door creaked, and I entered the morgue.
Hi, Andrew.
Getting up from his chair, he headed in my direction. Hello, I smiled back.
So, are you ready for a hard-working day?
Of course I am, Mr. Jones.
Well, then change your clothes, and I'll make some coffee. There's a lot of work today.
Richard Jones was a medium-sized man, with a small belly, and an incredibly kind expression on his face, and, in general, he was a very kind and sympathetic person, and always paid me maximum attention. He taught me, made me delicious coffee, and sometimes even could gently hit me if I did something wrong. I changed my clothes and went into our so-called workspace.
Well, that was fast.
His gruff voice echoed through the room.
The coffee is ready. Go get it.
He lit a cigarette and sat down in the same chair.
It's a terrible night,
he muttered softly.
In the morning, 3 bodies were brought. 2 pensioners from different parts of the city. There they are. One had suffocated at home. Apparently, the old idiot turned on the gas and went to bed. Luckily, the neighbors smelled the gas right on time. Otherwise, we would have much more work today.
That's horrible. And who were the others?
A woman over there was hit with a car. Her hands and feet were turned in the opposite directions. We are to make her look more or less fine so they could put her in the coffin.
I was always shocked by such conversations with him. Well, that is, this work, even for me, became so common that we quite calmly talked over a cup of coffee, how someone was torn apart, and sometimes even joked. My teacher loved black humor, and I got accustomed to it.
And I feel sorry for that girl.
He interrupted my train of thought.
Those 2 were already getting old and were already getting ready for death. The girl was brought here just before you arrived. She was only 20 years old. The police said that she took a lot of pills. That's because of her boyfriend, as soon as I've heard it.
20 years is not a child anymore. Usually, people understand that it's better not to eat a lot of pills.
Only God knows what they have in their heads. Alright, enough talking. Let's take a look at the girl first. Write the protocol. The corpse of a young girl, of the right build. Rigor mortis in all muscle groups is expressed satisfactorily.
Those were the words my working day began with. By the way, it was much shorter for me than for Richard, because I was just studying. and he sometimes even stayed here until the night. In general, it was a regular day of internship. I wrote the protocols and closely watched the work of a colleague. I've also conducted an autopsy of a 67-year-old man who suffocated with gas under his strict control. Having eaten some delicious burrito, which Mr. Jones kindly treated me to, I looked at the clock. The hand was already approaching the number 5. That was the time I usually went home. Having finished with the old man, and having listened to Mr. Jones' praises, I went to change my clothes, and even then I noticed how strangely he was looking at the corpse of the girl. He was walking around her as if examining. "Is something wrong?" I asked him. He hesitated, then answered,
"No, everything is fine. I forgot to tell you a couple of details to write in the protocol. I'll add them on my own."
"Well, then I'm off."
"Yeah, goodbye."
I left the morgue and went home. It was already beginning to get dark. Winter was coming, so it was getting dark early, and I was still on my way home when the street lights in our yard lit up. It was only when I reached the entrance that I didn't feel the backpack on my back. Damn, I must have left it in the morgue. What a bad memory I have. There was the phone and the keys to the apartment in that backpack. I sat for a while on the bench near the entrance and decided to go back. I have no idea why I was having doubts. Apparently, fate decided to give me a chance, but I missed it. After that, I took the bus to the morgue. When the building was already in front of me, I decided to quietly go in, pick up my things, and go home, so as not to distract people from work. But something went wrong. As soon as I entered the morgue, I heard a sound from the hall where the tables were standing.
"Finally, I'm fed up with old people. It isn't possible."
Perhaps he was saying something else, but that was all I could understand. The voice was terribly distorted in the room, and because of the echo, it was impossible to understand anything. I went as quietly as I could to the corner, poking my head out, and he was standing over the girl's corpse, a crumpled bag in one hand, and a scalpel or knife in the other. At first, I thought that maybe he decided to check it out one more time. He said before I left that I forgot to write something down. But then, I saw him slowly cutting off the flesh from the girl's leg and putting a piece of it in a bag. I got a little sick when he cut off other pieces after the first one. He did it so masterfully, not like a pathologist, but rather like a butcher. Catching myself on this thought, I realized that it was a bad idea to come back. He continued to cut off the pieces of meat from the girl, trying to take those which absence would be little noticeable through the clothes in which the girl would lie in the coffin. Why is he doing this? We've already done an autopsy, so why does he keep cutting the poor girl to pieces? Obviously, I didn't want to come around the corner and ask him that question. It was as if the good small man I was used to had been replaced. He walked differently, gesticulated differently, and generally behaved very strangely, not as usual. When the bag was full, he tied it up and dropped it into his bag, making smacking noises. It was when he did this that I got my first goosebumps, and with them bad thoughts crept into my head. He walked around the morgue, jumping like a child, jumping with happiness. It looked very suspicious. It was then that my curiosity got the better of my sanity, and I decided to follow him. He lived not far from his work, just a stone's throw. I left the morgue, said goodbye to our guard, and waited for him. He was just beginning to change when I left the main hall. Quietly, I hid behind the corner of the building and waited. It was as if I was possessed by some kind of obsession in those moments. I didn't even think whether I had to do it or not. Why was I doing that? Well, I'm sure that my curiosity will lead me to the grave someday. After about 20 minutes, the pathologist left and, closing the door, shouting something to the guard, walked with a cheerful gait in the direction of the main exit from the hospital. I followed him. By the way, he usually walked home from work, explaining that after the damp smell of corpses and the wall of the morgue, he likes to spend as much time in the fresh air as possible. I followed him for a short time, 15 minutes or less, and finally, he went into the shabby entrance of a 2-story apartment building and disappeared into its darkness. It was extremely easy to determine which apartment he lived in, as a light bulb flashed in one of the first-floor windows, and through the smoke-brown curtain in the kitchen, I saw his silhouette. He went into the kitchen, rummaged in his bag for a few seconds, and put the same package in the basin on the table, and went into the other room. He switched on a light in the next window. In general, he was wandering from one room to another for a few more minutes. I couldn't see what he was doing there. I sat under the window in the kitchen and barely leaned out to watch. One piece at a time, he took the meat out of the bag and washed it under the tap. He was standing right next to me, with only a thin pane of glass between us. He cut the meat on a board with a kitchen knife, put the pan on the gas, and put the meat in it. Only then I realized what was going on. The pathologist cut off the body parts and cooked them at home. Even then, I almost threw up from what I saw, only because of the thought that he was probably going to eat it now. The urge to vomit was getting closer. Despite this, I continued to watch him. He carefully turned the pieces of meat with a spatula, sprinkling them with salt and spices. He was humming something under his breath. I could hear it clearly, and suddenly, he turned in my direction. I immediately crouched under the window so that he couldn't see me. The old man opened the window, and a smell crept out of it. The smell of roasting meat. From this scene, I got goosebumps all over my body. I didn't understand how this was possible, and have already regretted several times that I had followed him. But on the other hand, I would have continued to work with a monster, and nobody knows how it would all end. Then there was something that was forever deposited in my memory. I watched him like that for some time, exactly until he laid out his culinary masterpiece on a plate and left the kitchen. Unfortunately, I didn't hear him, and it was too late when I felt the approach of another person. He left the apartment and came to me. Before I could turn around, I got a spray of pepper right in my face.
Pretending to be a spy. Get over here, damn boy. You thought I wouldn't see you?
He roared like an animal. I coughed horribly, almost spitting out chunks of my lungs. When I felt him grab my arm, I tried to get free, but all my attempts were in vain. I was totally disoriented. He was dragging me up the stairs like a really naughty puppy. That same smell of roast meat was getting stronger, and I found myself in his apartment. Based on what he was doing and who he was, I understood what was waiting for me in the near future.
What the fuck are you doing here? Explain it to me,
he shouted, throwing me to the floor.
Have you been following me?
No, I was just passing by. I saw your silhouette in the window.
You would have knocked on it, or come to visit. You had been sitting and watching.
He understood that I knew the whole truth. It was obvious, and my stupid excuses didn't interest him at all. I struggled to open my eyes. The first thing I saw was a corridor, the usual corridor of an old apartment. Everything was muddy. My eyes were terribly watery, and he was standing right next to me, not moving away. After a couple seconds, I saw him open a locker and take out a rope, and then he tried to tie my hands. I tried to resist, but a good blow to the face calmed me down a little. My ears rang, and I felt my hands being tied tightly with a rope.
Get up, puppy,
he growled again, trying to pull me to my feet, and then I was completely overcome by panic. Mr. Jones, let me go. I really won't tell anyone a single word. You'll never see me again.
Did you like that burrito?
He asked me suddenly. I immediately remembered the same burrito that he had treated me with in the morgue, and I threw up.
Remember that drunk guy who was beaten to death a couple of days ago? That was him.
he said with a weary smile and sat me down on a stool next to the kitchen table.
What are you puking about? It was delicious. You said so yourself.
He was just incredibly creepy. He was constantly baring his teeth as if his face had been replaced. And the voice too. He examined me, groped me like that poor girl lying on the table in the morgue. Let me go, please. Knowing what was waiting for me, I begged him, but he was unwavering. He sat down next to me and began to devour what he had prepared. Devour is the most suitable word in this case. He stuffed a mouthful of human meat, barely managing to chew it. I turned away so I wouldn't see the horror, and I threw up on the floor again.
Y'all clean it up.
Chewing, he shouted and grabbed my head with his hand and began to examine me.
So. It is necessary to kill you rather that you wouldn't do anything superfluous. You are so young, so strong. You know, I've got an idea. My friends and I will roast you on a spit.
Your friends? I thought, wiping vomit on my shoulder.
This is going to be a holiday,
he said, grinning nastily and drooling, and I was shaking. I sat and listened to the story of how I would be stuffed and fried on a spit from a man who was cooking and eating pieces of corpse meat in front of my eyes. My panic turned to anger. My instinct for self-preservation kicked in, and I tried to free my hands from the bonds, but the rope was too tight.
Don't even try to do anything right now. I'll quickly stick a knife in your eye and use it to dig out a piece of your tiny brain.
You are a sick son of a bitch. A monster. Untie me.
Are you serious? Do you really think I'd do that?
He abruptly pushed the table back and grabbed my head again, looking straight into my eyes.
You know, I'll probably leave you in the meantime. You'll live in the spare room. I'm really bored alone, so at least there will be someone to chat with.
My normal vision gradually returned to me, and I saw everything that surrounded me. The kitchen looked as if it hadn't been cleaned in years. There was garbage everywhere. Some bones, spilled liquid. All the walls were yellow with tobacco and antiquity. The shabby wallpaper hung in chunks from the walls. Everything was so disgusting that I almost threw up for the third time. The old man quickly reacted and covered my mouth with his hand, making me eat my own vomit.
Well, let me show you your new apartment,
said the psycho with a weary smile. He took my arm and led me into the room. He tossed me onto the bed and quickly closed the door.